it now. I don't think you're reading the book. I think you're going to try to read the intro 35 minutes before the show starts.
I am not going to do that. I look forward to reading a full book these days.
Will Pascal read the whole book?
No.
Ooh.
Pascal already has the Cliff Notes.
Pascal will read the last paragraph of every chapter. Or will he read the whole book? Oh, it's Steve Paxton's book. We're talking to Steve Paxton on Saturday. But you're jumping the gun. We haven't even started the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles, and M. Toussaint has banned me from the screen because she's a horrible producer.
I swear. There you are.
Yeah. No messages, no in-show messages. Look what you guys did. You ruined that whole thing. It was all you guys' fault.
I just got here.
Don't blame yourself. I'm blaming yourself. Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams with other channels and adding new shows. Also, I want to add, I was a guest on Sublation Media's Fatal Dates with friend Susie Kleiman. It was fun and emotionally moving episode. So look for it on Sublation's YouTube channel. It should be dropping soon. And congratulations on 15 years of Yo Gabba Gabba. A fun children's TV show that I got to be a part of. And rest in peace, good friend, Biz Marquis. We will miss you. We will not be doing our normal news show tonight because super producer MT Toussaint was able to book a great guest tonight that will attempt to get us peace-filled. I hope you guys are ready for tonight's episode. That being said, if you enjoy what we do here at TIR and don't want to make the yearly or monthly commitment, show your support with revolutionary merch. MT, can you bring up the merch?
Sure thing.
Oh, see, you're just doing me dirty today. What did I do to you? What did I do? I thought we were friends.
There's your precious merch.
Is this all I am to you? Okay, you do the merch pitch then.
Me? I don't have the notes.
Oh, now you don't have the notes.
Okay, 1 second. Let me see if I can pull up the notes. I don't even see the notes. I don't even see them.
See, that's what you get.
Okay, here. I hope you guys are ready for tonight's episode. That said, if you enjoy what we do here at TIR and don't want to make the yearly or monthly commitment, show your support with revolutionary merch. MT, can you bring this up on the screen real quick?
So now they know that everything is written down. Thank you to all the patrons in YouTube and Twitch subscribers here. You guys are the oh so important cogs in the TIR machine. If you'd like to be part of what we do here, have access to the call-in segment that we do, have access to all the champagne rooms, there's only one way to do it. Become a patron. You also get to join us for our movie nights, which we decided, I think it's been decided, that we will be doing Willie Dynamite for the next movie night. Is that true? Are we officially going to do that? We're going to do Willie Dynamite for movie night? Well, let's bring in the man that made that executive decision. I'll have you bring him in because I'm having some problems with my computer right now, MT. Please welcome the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Joe Perry to my Steven Tyler. He is the Pascal Robert.
Coming up with those names, buddy. You're coming up with those. I'm telling you. You don't disappoint. Peace and greetings to the chat, the audience, and Jason Miles.
That is a deep cut right there. Only real OGs know who I just mentioned. I haven't seen anybody mention it in the chat. Speaking of the mighty Mount Rushmore of podcasters, that is, This is Revolution. He is everyone's favorite middle manager of the Deep State. MT, can you please bring in Deep State Cuba? I feel like it's been forever since we've seen you, Cuba.
The live show feels like a decade ago, doesn't it?
It does. Are you ready for the next live show?
Yes, from Odessa. By candlelight. We'll be doing it on our phones, and it'll last for precisely as long as the battery life of the oldest iPhone between us.
Oof.
And then we hitch a ride out of town with Azov.
Oh, wow.
You hit your right out of town with Azov.
Come on, guys. Dimitri is cool.
MT is going to be joining us. Kuba and I know what MT looks like, but Pascal has not met her in real life, so we should do like have him find her.
Police lineup style.
Yeah, police lineup style. Have like 5 Asian women.
Number 3, step forward and try to. Number 3, let's hear your best merch pitch. Too smooth. That's not her.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
That's going to be the game. Pascal find MT. That should be.
I knew we would go there.
Someone says Kuba looks like the white guy who says I have black.
Who says he has black friends, but he does.
Actually, my black friends told me never to say that.
Good black friends.
Oh, wow.
I'm over here trying to get serious about tonight's show, and the comments are just instantaneously.
I just realized that like we've gone like a couple of weeks with like all black content. Mm-hmm. In terms of like the host. Kuba's probably like, wow, he's like integrated. He's like kind of like the Rosa Parks of our show right now.
I
would never disagree with Pascal. So
Pascal, I know you're not going to approve this. I was talking to MT as I was uploading the intro trailer for today, and I haven't uploaded an intro trailer in forever. And so it was my first time I got to look at like YouTube metrics and stuff, and I saw some comments, and someone left a comment and they said, "What happened to all the revolutionary content?" So I responded, "Kill Whitey." Yeah. Better?
So we're not going to let Jason answer comments anymore. That's what that means.
And that's why I don't answer.
Change his Twitter password.
Yep.
I don't work, dude. So many people are running the TIR Twitter. Sometimes there's posts I'm like, I didn't say that. I feel like that's you and Gene.
Do you want us to put our initials on it?
Ooh.
A little bit of accountability?
No. What you do is you have to include an emoji, and the skin tone is coded to the co-host.
Okay. I feel like Gene is going to be conflicted.
Yeah. Like Florida Evan. Damn.
Well, ask him what he uses in his personal life.
I think Gene tries to use a tannish.
Yeah, I think it's tannish too.
I started with Simpsons Yellow, and I'll die with Simpsons Yellow.
Oh, and people apparently think Pascal wants to join the new Black Panther Party.
I don't know where they get that from.
The only
Leather
gun
jacket?
he owns is the love gun. So.
The love gun? I don't want to know. Let's move past this. Let's just go past this. You look great today, Pascal, by the way.
You do.
Thank you.
Very healthy color.
Yes, we got new lighting, mic stands. We're doing the thing.
Take that, Brianna Joy Gray.
Oh.
We're gonna get you some more stands. We're gonna get you some more.
Ooh,
Maybe we'll get you
Brianna
some
Joy.
twinkle lights.
We got it for you, nigga.
There you go, Brianna Joy.
Already?
You're calling
We're
it.
gonna get you some.
Well,
get you some
they
twinkle lights.
wanted more revolutionary content.
That's true. Gotta give the people what they want.
Give them what they want. Intra left beef for no reason.
Yes. Anyway,
Pascal's like,
Just for the hell of
ruining
it.
all my opportunities to be on that woman's show. No, we're not. Many that watch this show don't know that its name comes from a lyric in a song I wrote for my band Bitter Lake. This is not war. This is not a war. This is revolution. We fight wars over drugs, crime, terrorism, and these wars, much like the more traditional ones the U.S. is a part of, seem to have no end in sight. The unintended consequences of these wars have the innocuous sounding name collateral damage. That collateral damage has polluted drinking water for entire populations, killed millions of innocents, and caused this country to lead the world in incarceration of millions. The war to end terror begats terror. Is it possible to even put peace on the table? Our guest today believes we should. He believes that through peaceful struggle, we can achieve a world without war. MT, can you play the intro video or do I have to play it?
I think I can play it. I've never
Okay,
played a video before. How do you play it?
Oh, no, I have to play it.
You have to play it. Okay.
Raise your hand if you're open to changing your mind about important things. Now raise your hand if you think war is never justified. Some hands I think not raised, possibly because war culture is never questioned.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "There has never been a good war or a bad peace, but it's perpetual war, much like capitalist realism, a ubiquitous part of life." We'll ask these questions and more. This is Revolution.
Every person I've spoken to outside of Charlottesville who who I've asked has had no idea that the reason a statue of Robert E. Lee is still standing in this town, albeit covered in black plastic, is because a Virginia state law bans the removal of war monuments. And I have never met anyone, anywhere, who has even considered the idea of banning the removal of peace monuments. The hardest part would be finding a peace monument to remove.
Nice.
All right. Let's bring in our guest. Would you like to introduce our guest before you bring him in, MT?
Sure. Well, our next guest, David Swanson, is a person that I've been following on Twitter and on Facebook for years. And he's really gotten me to think about some things, and I hope he'll do the same for you too. Let's bring him in. Hello, David.
Hi, thanks for having me. Great video.
Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited about the show today. MT, did you want to start off with the first question?
I actually wanted to start off real quick with this quote somebody posted in the chat before the show even started. So this is a quote from William S. Burroughs. This is a war universe, war all the time. That is its nature. There may be other universes based on all sorts of other principles, but ours seems to be based on war and games. Have you ever heard that quote before, David?
I don't think I have. It's totally possible I've heard it and forgotten it, but I dramatically disagree with it. I think it's absolute nonsense. First of all, we don't know anything about the universe or even any other planets, just this one little rock. And virtually every species on it does not engage in war. It's just about ants and humans, although the ants are much more courageous and glorious in their wars than the humans. And most humans have never been near any war. We've been around for millions of years, and we've pretty much resembled what we are now for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's not clear that there was anything that you could call a war at all before about 10,000 years ago. And what it was closer to a violent sport than to what war is now. And it was sporadic. It was here and there. There's always some place with a war. There's always a million places without a war. And there are cultures and societies that have gone centuries with having wars and then gone centuries not having wars. And there is absolutely no requirement to have war. In fact, if you search the medical records of doctors worldwide back through history, the documented cases of suffering and PTSD from war deprivation is a grand total of 0. People do just fine deprived of war. In fact, most people who engage in war, even sitting in a trailer in Nevada and pushing a button and blowing up some people with a missile halfway around the world, they suffer. They suffer dramatically for it. So I don't know what it means for something to be natural, but if it means anything, it doesn't mean this. It doesn't mean this thing that everybody tries to avoid. The biggest war-making place on earth is the United States, and just about everybody in the United States avoids war if they possibly can. And the top reason anybody gets involved in it, they've been saying in surveys for years and years, is the lack of any other way to get to college, the lack of any other career path. You had 19 Congress members complain to Joe Biden that he was doing anything about student debt because that was bad for military recruitment. Got to keep them poor so you can force them into the military. I mean, if it was natural, why would you need $1 billion a year for advertising it? If it was natural, it would just happen.
Now, I want to ask you about that. You recently wrote about that on your personal blog, about the fact that it was a big push from Congress to make sure that student debt relief didn't go through. And now we're seeing through the judicial system that there's going to kick back of student debt relief. And I haven't seen too much mainstream media attention about it. In alternative media places, I definitely seen it. But can you expand on that a little bit more about kind of the poverty draft, if you will?
Well, there are obviously lots of interests opposed to ending student debt or making college free the way many countries do. And they include the bank's interest in making money. But the Congress members' willingness to talk openly about what used to be a bit shameful secret, that they're keeping people poor in order to get them into the military, it's disturbing that they now say that quiet bit out loud. And it's something that they've for years done without any shame when it comes to immigration. Oh, you want to be a citizen? Well, go in the military first. That'll make you a citizen. This is a poverty draft. Doesn't mean that nobody rich ever goes into the military. Doesn't mean that people don't go into the military for completely different reasons. Doesn't mean people don't have 86 reasons all in a big jumble for why they go into the military. But the number one reason that people tell is the active duty members of the military have told people in polls for years and years is that they didn't have any other choice. They wanted money for college. They wanted a job. They wanted a career. There was nothing else they could do in this country that is rolling in money, unlimited money for wars, even other people's wars, more money for wars in Ukraine than for anything else that this country does. And for billionaires, of course, we need some more billionaires. There's plenty of money. But, the notion that you can't make college free, that would be a reckless spending of money, that you can't end student debt. The one country on earth that has not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that treats children so horribly, the one wealthy country on earth that makes it so hard to get an education, the country on earth that is the major holdout on basic human rights treaties and runs around engaging in wars in the name of a rules-based order. Well, what does that mean unless it's, we make the rules, we give the orders? What about abiding by some of the rules that the world has created that you're holding out on as this rogue state because you know better? How is it better for kids not to be able to get an education? I'm not going to be able to afford to send my kids to college. I'll be able to afford the airplane tickets to Canada or Europe so they can go to college. But here, we're going to need some scholarships.
David, I'd like to ask you a question, if you don't mind. Do you think that the origins of war are connected directly to the modern nation state and how it's evolved within its hierarchies? Do you think that the actual way in which government has evolved is one of the contributing factors as to why war became a normative part of what societies and nations and empires developed over times as a means to settle their disagreements?
It depends what we count as war, right? Because, what little groups of humans did for tens of thousands of years, generally trying to scare each other off, resembles the mass slaughter of aerial bombing. Not at all, and I don't think even a soldier in a war less than 100 years ago would recognize a kid pushing a button and blowing people up with a missile on a video screen as war. But if you count everything that's typically called war back through the millennia, then obviously war long predates the modern nation state. But if you ask yourself what keeps war going now, obviously it's nations. Obviously it's having set the United Nations up not as a democratic body, not as a body representing people, but as a body representing nations, with the five worst nations a little more equal than all the others, with veto power over everything. And those nations being corrupted, doing the bidding of the weapons industry that makes such a fortune. off these wars, and corrupted by the media that loves the wars and loves people who support the wars. My God, did you feel them drooling over the idea that those two people in Poland were killed by a Russian missile? I mean, and by the way, both sides are using Russian missiles, and most wars, both sides have U.S.-made weapons. If that doesn't tell you something about the stupidity of war. But the fact that you could, a crazy barrage of missiles by this country, if one of them strays into Poland, it's destroy the world time. But if one of them from the other side strays into Poland, oh, well, nothing to see here, no harm done. It was a defensive missile, and now we needed defending from those two poor people. And, we don't need any long bios on what wonderful people they were anymore, as everyone was planning there for a couple hours. The madness of nationalism is a huge part of what sells wars. It's what gets Ukrainians to fight in wars. It's what gets Russians to fight in wars. And nobody does more nationalism. No country is more saturated in flag waving and patriotic shows than this one.
Kuba, I know that you have a lot to say on this subject.
So one thing that you mentioned earlier about how not fighting in wars has never triggered any PTSD, it's never harmed anybody, reminded me of Randall Collins' book, Violence, A Microsociology. And that went into detail about the type of emotional trauma and the combination of fear, guilt, anxiety that soldiers experience before going into battle, and how much of warfighting, especially historically, has been determined by which side had a greater willingness to fight, because there's something profoundly unnatural about going all the way to inflicting physical violence on another person. Generally, somebody needs to get into an emotionally extreme condition in order to be able to do that. And then afterwards, when what Randall Collins describes, the forward panic runs out, then you have to live with the consequences of what you did. But so I think that largely supports what you're saying, that this is these conflicts are they cut against some essential elements of human nature. People are a social species, not quite the same way as ants, but we have social instincts. Most people have to get over a significant empathy inhibition before they're willing to harm somebody else. But he also points out that there is what he described as a violent elite, a 1% or perhaps even fewer of soldiers that don't experience anxiety or fear and in the face of battle, and that makes them extraordinarily effective. And that trait lines up imperfectly, but not coincidentally, with what would be described as psychopathy or sociopathy in other circumstances. And so one question is, well, if there is a minority of people who don't have the same inhibitions towards violence against others, and recognize that it can be an effective tool for getting what they want, whether it's on a geopolitical level or, on a personal level, right? Mafia hitmen and fighter pilot aces actually share a similar psychological disposition, if I recall Randall Collins' work correctly. So what do we do, if you do have a majority, an overwhelming consensus for peace, with a minority that doesn't have those inhibitions against violence, that recognizes that in a peaceful world, the first person willing to fight actually has a tremendous advantage.
Well, I'm not sure that the difference made by individuals in these wars that consist of mass firings of missiles is as significant as it was when you were dealing with hand-to-hand and trench-to-trench combat as the main form of war. But I think you're absolutely right that it's very, very difficult for most people to kill, and most students of what passes for U.S. history are shocked when they're told that the vast majority of the greatest generation in the greatest war ever, World War II, never shot their weapons, shot them at the sky, shot them at the ground, avoided shooting them, and back through all wars, back until just the past generation or so, when they've learned how to condition members of militaries to kill without thinking, and they've got the percentages way up of willing to kill. Able to survive well afterwards, having done that, reintegrate into a society where you're not supposed to kill everything that moves, and not so much. I mean, you look at the hundreds of thousands of Russians who've picked up and left rather than go into a war, and who've been able to. Whereas in Ukraine, the men can't get out, and they're forced into war or prison. You know, this. What does this say about freedom in Ukraine? But I think that there's a very, I mean, obviously there's a danger, and I've heard people advocate this when they've started out with the question that you just gave, in imagining that we can identify the sociopaths, we can identify who the psychopaths are and lock them up or kill them or disempower them or give them some sort of chemical injection. I know you didn't say anything remotely like this. A friend of mine, a good friend of mine, a good liberal, progressive, loving, decent friend of mine went way off in this direction, and I just want to point out that we do not know how to identify such people, and imagining we did would be disastrous. What do we do, though, about the fact that there are such people? Well, we don't give power to individuals. We do democracy. Rather than bombing places in the name of democracy, we actually try it. We actually cease to give a single individual the nuclear power to destroy the world, the power to make law, the power to unmake law, the power to start wars, the power to take tens of billions of dollars of weapons that are sitting around at the Pentagon and send them somewhere and say, kill lots of people with these. No individual should have that power. And the pretense that the Congress is much of a step away from the White House toward democracy is absolutely ridiculous. We actually need to disempower this wealthy elite, whether we think they're sociopaths or not. They're operating as a sociopathic institution that has sociopathic tendencies, regardless of how good these people are when they get home from their job on Capitol Hill.
I actually, that's you mentioned the media before. You mentioned the arms manufacturers and the media. And I think that one element of one major requirement to get a nominally democratic, but even under an authoritarian system like in Russia, to get a people on board with a conflict, you have to break down those barriers of empathy. You have to make people familiar with, even comfortable with violence, and have a way of dehumanizing, distancing the victims away from the feelings of compassion or sympathy that would get in the way of. And you can see that in warrior cultures, there's violent rites of initiation, like in Sparta, a boy didn't become a man until he murdered a slave in this specific type of guerrilla warfare exercise. In some Mesoamerican cultures, you had human sacrifice play that role of acclimating, making people comfortable with violence and elevating what is normally abhorrent into something to be celebrated. Do you think that the media in the United States, especially, and not just the news media, but if you think about the role of sports in defining teams and in making people comfortable with physical aggression or entertainment, plays a similar function with the American public, making them comfortable with war?
Oh, no question whatsoever. And many of us have been screaming for decades, why won't you show the victims? Why isn't this cell phone victim footage from a U.S. missile thousands of miles away as interesting as this cell phone victim footage from a racist cop killing somebody on a street in the U.S.? Why can't we see the victims? And finally, the media found a war where they want to show U.S. television and newspaper consumers the victims. They happen to look different from the victims of most wars. They're Ukrainians, but it's a good thing, right, to finally see and hear stories of some of the victims of war, if people can expand from that to an understanding that all the wars have victims, and that in fact Ukraine isn't anywhere near the top 10 list of wars in counting the victims these days. Here in Charlottesville, we had 3 football players murdered the other day, and everybody was horrified. And I'm glad, 100% glad. They should be horrified. But George W. Bush killed 1 million people, and he's doing a pep rally with Zelensky with no shame. And nobody has any problem with it, right? And it's not just because it's bigger numbers, so it's a statistic, not a person. It's because it's the wrong kind of people. It's foreign people. This is the prejudice that even your very best, most progressive, anti-racist, anti-bigot person is still allowed to have. Foreigners, distant people, collateral damage, the people killed in war. Well, why? Because it's war. It's okay if it's war. We had these 2 people killed in Poland. There was either a horrible, worst murder of the century, or perfectly fine and just an unfortunate accident, depending on where the missile came from. We have lawyers go into Congress and say, well, these people blown up with this drone missile, either that's a horrible case of mass murder, or it's perfectly fine. It depends on whether it's a war or not. And we don't actually know if it's a war because President Obama won't show us the memo where he said if it's a war, so there's nothing we could say. This is, why do we have this institution called war that excuses murder, mass murder? You have a war, you can't cheat on your taxes, you can't shoplift, you can't rape, you can't assault, but you can murder. Why? It makes no sense.
Pascal, do you want to add something to that?
Well, to answer the question why, I would argue because some powers believe that violence is the most effective ways to secure those things in which is important to them, which is material wealth, resources, and more power. That forcing people to be compelled through physical violence is effective.
But it's not as effective as nonviolent action, and this is well established now. If you look at the list I've made at worldbeyondwar.org/list, these are dozens of cases through history where nonviolence was used instead of war.
Can you give a somewhat recent example of that? I did read through your list. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I had a chance to read every link for every historical moment, but I did go through all of them, all the way down to, was it the last
85.
one? 85 BC?
Oh, no. I remember there's 85 entries on the list. I didn't get through it all myself because when I hit the 1971 case in the Polish shipyards, that was a rabbit hole I never emerged from.
Well, I'm not going to claim expertise on all 85 of those items in that list either. But I am going to claim that people like Erica Chenoweth, who have done studies of this, have found that over the past century, nonviolent campaigns have succeeded over twice as often as violent ones, which does not mean that violent ones have never succeeded. And it certainly does not mean that nonviolent ones always succeed. They usually fail. Both types usually fail. But if you're trying to resort to the strongest tool available, because it has the greatest chance of success, it's nonviolent action. And I love that this show contrasts, and the song you mentioned as the origin for the title of the show contrasts war with revolution, and that you have all these images of the Russian Revolution, which was principally nonviolent and was preceded by the nonviolent actions of 1905 that radically changed Russia and were a step, and was a revolution that took Russia out of World War I and said no to that insane war, but of course launched, over a century of the United States hostility and violence toward Russia, beginning with sending in troops until 1920. But recent examples, there are dozens, and you look just back to the Arab Spring, and you look at people in Tunisia or other countries across North Africa, the Middle East, overthrowing dictators. You look at Liberia, where the women back when this country was attacking Iraq and launching this whole series of catastrophic wars, these women in Liberia were, through nonviolent protest, risking their lives in the streets, forcing the two warring sides to come to the table, and then surrounding the room and not letting them out until they made peace. We can question what tactic will work in a particular circumstance, but we can't take seriously the sort of CNN choice of war or do nothing, when there are dozens of people showing that there are all these things that work better than war.
Can I ask you a personal question? And I ask this question to the panel and even to the chat, and people that want to comment later. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Did the anti-war peace movement die after Vietnam? I know there's been anti-war protests since Vietnam, but as a movement that people really want to get behind, a peace first movement, has that energy, did it kind of fizzle out after Vietnam? I'll take my answer off here.
I think the obvious short answer is yes, but it's complicated a bit by the fact that we're always short on the sort of movement we should have, and we're also always short on coverage of what movement we've got. So there's always been a lot more activism going on than we know about, but it's never been what it should be. And it's further complicated if you look at the global scene. I mean, they just had big peace rallies in cities around Italy with the political leaders of their government coming to the peace rallies and speaking against any more weapons for Ukraine, demanding negotiations and peace, and things that get you kicked out of the Progressive Caucus in Washington. So it depends, and it changes all the time where the action is, which country you're allowed to say peace in at the moment.
What say you, Kuba?
Well, I think that the peace movement in Vietnam was that there was a structural and institutional basis for it, which is no longer operative, and that's the draft. When people who had no interest in fighting, who were frightened of doing it, and who would seek a way to escape it rather than be forced into either becoming a fugitive or a soldier, that created the kind of mass mobilization that allowed the movement to flourish. And it was a very canny strategy on the part of the United States Department of Defense to switch to an all-volunteer force, because then many people who might be worried about the perpetual conflicts created by American foreign policy, they no longer have a personal stake and they can tune out. While the people who do end up in the service are either have a mentality which makes them willing to accept the possibility of death or dismemberment for their country, service they call it, or that are economically or socially marginal enough so that they're fully disposable. And when you have kind of insulated the rest of society from the consequences of your war fighting, it's hard to get a peace movement going, especially when the combination of everyone's indebtedness, high cost of medicine, high cost of education, means that for the working class especially, you don't even have a lot of time or headspace to engage with things that are fun and pleasant and nurturing, let alone the dismal hellscape that is politics and international relations.
Pascal.
I would.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tucson. Oh, no, go ahead, Tucson. I'm sorry.
Okay. I would add to that also, apparently the number of families that are bearing the brunt of these fatalities in these wars is increasingly small. It's the same families over and over. There was a time when everyone knew somebody who was involved in the war or who was enlisted or something, and that's not the case anymore. I don't know anyone who's in the military anymore. I had a cousin who was in the military, but he left, and now, of all the people I know, no one. I will also add that there's no real press coverage of peace movements. Wasn't there a huge protest in the 90s against war?
I believe it was the 2000s against.
2000s.
I mean, there were protests against both Iraq wars, but in 2003, they were significantly larger than the ones around Desert Storm.
I mean, I was taught that in the 60s, the news showed everything. And then they learned from that. The powers that be decided, we're not going to show this stuff anymore. So they don't show coffins. They don't show protests.
And protesters, too, get bottled up in those free speech zones. That was one of the great innovations of the George W. Bush administration.
Very true. Very true. Pascal?
Yeah, I actually agree with Kuba that the end of the draft was a significant death knell for the Vietnam War protest era. And I think that the period in which the United States did not engage in war after Vietnam because of the moral consciousness of loss that so plagued the country. There was a time period, I'm old enough to remember, where some people believed that the United States would never go to war again after Vietnam because it was such a major cataclysm to the consciousness of the country. But I would also argue that after 9/11, the concept of perpetual war was very much in the psyche of the American people. But there was a very significant anti-war movement. You had Code Pink. There were people that were protesting. And I would actually say that the anti-war movement after 9/11 was killed very effectively by the presidency of Barack Obama, because his illusion of hope and change was a very convincing means of getting people to believe that he was going to offer some kind of alteration to the normal machinations of American military and the functioning of the American military-industrial complex, and they were wrong. He was as belligerent as Bush, and I think that one of the worst consequences of his presidency is that it neutralized any kind of real anti-war effort at all.
I mean, and can we also bring this conversation down to the domestic level as well? Also, that's why I wanted to bring that up in the opening statements. I think when we use the terminology of war, it doesn't just stop at the international level with drone bombings. I mean, we've seen drone assassinations here domestically as well. We have an extremely militarized police force throughout the country, even in much smaller municipalities that don't have anywhere near the crime threat of major metropolitan cities, but still you see the flak jacketed police, the battering ram tank-like vehicles that they have. A few years ago, when I was still in West Oakland, there was a group of women, I believe they still have an organization called Moms for Housing, that had commandeered vacant housing that was owned by a multinational corporation. It was vacant for some time. And they were living in it with children. They were doing a news drop on Democracy Now!, which comes on at about 5 a.m. our time on the West Coast. And they had to immediately get taken out of the studio because the police had come there with the battering ram tank-like vehicle to expel unarmed women and their infant children out of a home. And it was because of so much national media attention that eventually the corporation sold the home to the city of Oakland, who let the moms stay in there. But there's something to be said about war on drugs, on crime, hell, even on poverty. What say you about the verbiage, the acceptable verbiage of war, and how we accept it into the psyche?
Can I just piggyback
Sure.
one other observation there? After 9/11, there was a debate about whether to treat the attack on the Twin Towers as a criminal matter rather than an act of war.
Mm-hmm.
That it would actually send a stronger message to work to reduce Osama bin Laden, Al Qaeda, the perpetrators, to criminals, murderers, rather than elevating them to warriors. And that it would also mean that the tools at your disposal would be those of law enforcement, investigation, Interpol, right? Maybe let's say European law enforcement rather than the American version, which is war by a different name. So is that like with that distinction between like civil criminal procedure and war fighting, where violence is the single tactic, is that something that could be useful, right? Like we respond to violence as a crime, not as a symmetrical war conflict.
Can I piggyback off your piggyback?
It's a totem pole now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totem pole now. I just want to say I don't believe I don't know what war has actually been officially declared since Vietnam. That's supposed to be an act of Congress, and so far these conflicts have been classified as conflicts and not wars.
Yeah,
so that goes to the verbiage question as well.
There has not been a declaration of war actually since World War II in the United States government. Not Vietnam. That's not what the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was. It was a sleazy, sneaky maneuver. We actually have that debate. Should we treat it as a crime or should we treat it as an excuse to wage war on the whole world? It didn't make it much into the U.S. corporate media. I wish it had. It's hard to even explain to anyone that Afghanistan was willing to turn bin Laden over to a third country to be put on trial. They don't want to hear that. But we have an actual test. It's not theoretical. What would have worked better, right? Because shortly after that, you had terrorist attacks in England and in Spain. And in England, they treated it as an act of war and went to war with other countries and generated lots more terrorist attacks. In Spain, they treated it as a crime. They got all Spanish troops the heck out of Iraq, and they said, we're not going to take part in this war anymore. And apart from the Basques terrorism from within Spain, which is now over too peacefully, there was not a foreign terrorist attack in Spain from that day to this. So it's not a mystery that you generate terrorism with larger scale terrorism under the name of of war. And there was a Vietnam syndrome, and then there was even an Iraq syndrome, and you couldn't elect people like Joe Biden or John Kerry or Hillary Clinton for years, and then it faded away. And now you can put the guy who led the push on Capitol Hill for the war on Iraq into the White House with hardly a mention of the fact that he did that. And so we have to keep memories alive of how horrified we were by things when they happened. And if we're gonna be able to resist new wars. And I agree with you all about what the draft meant for the peace movement, but it's not a price I'm willing to pay. I don't want to create a draft. We may get it. They are 15,000 short this year, expecting to be 28,000 short next year. U.S. military recruitment. They want a war on Russia and a war on China. But I don't. There's 6 million people died before the draft ended the war on Vietnam. We haven't seen that since, outside of distant places like the Congo. We haven't seen anything that bad. It was not a price I'm willing to pay for a bigger peace movement, but that is what happened.
I think the reason why I bring up the question about the peace movement, and I'm glad Kuba brought up the 2003 protests, because we forget there was a 2004 election. And that was the election to take out the warmonger. And what happened? Anyone?
Well,
some people thought it was stolen in Ohio.
Well, you put him up against a guy who was for it before he was against it, before he was for it, which was not a peace candidate. And then you came back in 2006 and gave the Democrats both houses with the top position of every voter being, we want to end the war. And the Democrats came in and escalated the war and said, we want to escalate the war so we can run against it again in 2008, and defunded the peace movement and put everything into electing a Democrat to an imperial throne in 2008. You can read a book called Party in the Streets by a couple of academics who went around and surveyed everybody at giant and small peace rallies for years. And there's no question. We had a significant peace movement in 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. Because the Democratic Party was pretending it cared about peace, and people who identified principally with the Democratic Party thought they could be for peace. And it disappeared for the same reason. The Democratic Party is not for peace anymore. I don't have to be. And so if we had had people who were for peace first and the political party thing was secondary, we would have had more lasting power for a peace movement.
Do you think that there could be progress made on the cultural front that isn't depending on political leadership, where the kind of media consumption, the kind of media diet that primes Americans to valorize conflict, to normalize violence, to make that distinction between Americans and foreigners in terms of the value of human life, to conflate a metaphysical good and evil with the sides of a conflict, with us or against us. How could you deprogram the culture? And would that be a place to get started that would rely less on electoralism and on political elites?
Well, nobody ever voted themselves the right to vote. Activism has always changed the world far more than voting alone. There is no question. We need to share videos like this one, and papers and books and artwork and music. We need to reclaim peace holidays. Veterans Day didn't start out as Veterans Day. It started out as a peace holiday and was transformed into a war holiday after the destruction of Korea. If you go to peacealmanac.org, you find something significant on it each of the 365 days, including numerous holidays to reclaim and recreate. I see people in the chat saying, should, weapons dealers be allowed to fund campaigns? Well, they shouldn't be allowed to secretly pay sports leagues to celebrate militaries before games. They shouldn't be allowed to fund think tanks and university centers. They shouldn't be allowed to send members of the military into schools. And no, they shouldn't be allowed to fund campaigns or to build one weapon in 86 pieces in 86 different congressional districts to hold those jobs over people. And they shouldn't be allowed to have stock in weapons companies bought by Congress members, some of whom openly brag about how much money they're making off the next war. I mean, we should bring back the concept of shame. That there was a much bigger peace movement than the 60s in the 20s. And in the 30s, it was still shameful. And you had congressional hearings on the shame of profiting from war. That people would laugh at the very idea now. We have to work on changing people's minds, but it's not a difficult thing. If you can talk to somebody for an hour, you can dramatically change their minds, because most people don't know basic facts about militarism and about the unique role of the United States in global militarism. They don't know that 80% of the weapons are coming from the U.S., that 90% of the foreign military bases are U.S., that the U.S. is the biggest arms dealer to the dictatorships it claims to oppose, that it wages more wars than anybody else, that no other country does, that the U.S. has given more free weapons to Ukraine than Russia's entire military budget. Nobody knows basic facts, and so it's not hard to start changing their thinking if you just get to talk to them for a little bit.
Well, thank you very much, David, for joining us for this hour. That is David Swanson. Wherever you're watching the show, there are links in the description to read David's work. Will you be joining us in the champagne room?
Will there be champagne?
Yes.
Of a sort.
That's where you go to speak your mind and not get canceled.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So you can say everything you said with like an F-bomb on the back.
The free speech is the champagne.
Cuba. God damn it, Cuba.
He's a poet.
I would give you a hug right now if you were in front of me.
He's a poet.
I'm hoping if you're wearing pants. I mean, if you have pants on.
Never.
Never.
The bing dang is bing banging.
I wanted to say that we're all aware of we're all on the internet. We're all aware of the concept of red pilling. I was hoping today to maybe peace pill the chat and the panel. How do you think we did?
I don't know.
Well, you didn't know that was my goal. I snuck you in.
What do I always say, MT? This shit is chess, not checkers.
Hey.
So
even though I love weed, what does that mean?
Apparently, Sweden is the country they put the peace pill in the tap water. Right?
Sweden's signing on to NATO on war. I'm afraid.
That's true.
Pascal, do you feel that the chat has been peace pilled, or do you think they still want violence at all costs?
No, man. I think that one of the premises of having good left praxis is to be anti-war. I think there's room for more peace talk.
Kuba, are you down for peace talk?
War is, for me, of course it's bad. A lot of things are bad, but it's also incredibly wasteful and inefficient. And that offends my consultant brain. There are better ways to invest that productive capital. There are, for instance, climate change, demilitarization on a global scale takes care of climate change in a day. But the addiction that political power has to the weapons industry and to bigger, better, and more energy and resource intensive armaments is part of what's killing the planet. By itself, it's killing the planet. And I don't know how to get out of. I unfortunately, I kind of agree with the William S. Burroughs quote at the beginning, right? We're in a war universe right now. How do we get out of it? How do we change the programming? And that is a devilish problem. I'm glad that, David, you're putting your energy into it, because honestly, it's too hard for me. And it should be one of the tenets of not just the left, but any movement that calls itself humane, let alone humanist, let alone democratic, should aim for the abolishment of war. I think that's it shouldn't be a point of contention. The question is, how much war do we need to get to that point, if we can ever? And I realize that there's 89 cases where peaceful pressure achieved what violence could not. And I would love that to be the next chapter of our collective global political evolution. But if I had to bet, it would go the other way.
Well, the point is not to analyze the world, but to change it, or something like that. Somebody said, whose picture I saw at the start of the show. I'm no better at making predictions than anybody else. I'm just interested in at least going down trying. And the U.S. military not only has more money than most countries in the world's entire economies, but it produces more greenhouse gases than most entire countries. There are 30, 40 countries that produce more. You take all the militaries of the world, if they were a country, they'd be number 4 in greenhouse gas emissions, and they're left out of the treaties. They have these big conferences. They go to Egypt and kiss up to a dictator and have a conference, the 27th one after 26 abysmal failures. They're going to deal with the climate. And they don't even pretend to be serious, because they leave militarism, which is 5, 6, 7% of all greenhouse gas emissions, out. Free pass. We can pretend that the militaries are destroying a different planet, like we got 2 of them. On top of that, the money. It's not just a side issue. The money kills vastly more people than the wars, and that's going to be true until the wars go nuclear, because you can take little fractions of the money that's being spent on these wars and transform the world. You can end starvation on the whole planet for $30 billion a year, and that's just like one Ukraine weapons bill out of Congress. It's 3% of the $1 trillion that the U.S. puts into militarism every year, just the U.S., right? The Green New Deal, the wildest dreams of advocates for a Green New Deal don't approach 20% of the military budget, and the Green New Deal pays for itself. It's a money maker, but not a world destroyer. So the money is absolutely central to it all.
The sinews of war are endless money.
Well, on that depressing note, I'll be on Movie Night Extravaganza tomorrow talking about Bullworth with Forrest and Conan and friends.
Good movie.
And we'll see you guys in the champagne room. Should we turn the calls on, MT?
Yeah, I think people have things they want to say.
Okay, do you want to listen to them?
If they make it quick, how about that? Make it snappy.
We're gonna do a quick champagne room. We all of us except for Cuba have a lot of reading to do for Saturday.
Right.
And I have to rewatch Bullworth. All I remember is that song. Can you sing it for us?
What song is that? Ghetto Superstar?
Can you sing the hook?
Can
you?
No.
You know it.
Do I?
Yeah, a little bit. Can you just hum it?
You're an all-star.